good to be with all of you today. Now I'm waiting for a fireplace to appear here so we can show that we're all going to have a nice fireside chat. I'd like to welcome back to the stage Xerox CEOs Ursula Burns and Susan Hockfield, President of MIT. Please give them a warm round of applause. You know, I just tweeted out a few minutes ago telling my friends to catch me online at 10:25. This has to be a remarkable moment where we've got 3,000 people in the audience. This is somewhat of a government-run event. I know it's got a lot of private sector partners, and we're 20 minutes early, which means we have a lot of time here to sit and get to know one another.
Prepared.
And I have two objectives in our conversation. One, I'd like to run at some of the issues, Susan, that you laid out in your recipe for innovation, what you thought were the missing ingredients, and get at some of that. But I also want to humanize this discussion a bit and talk about what this means to people in terms of real jobs, their futures, opportunities. Ursula, I was just reading online about your incredible life, and basically you're not the kind of run-of-the-mill Fortune 500 CEO in terms of your background. I'd like to get into how technology and business and innovation really changed the path, and what it means is that path open to others. But I guess I'd like to begin with a New York Times piece, Susan, that you wrote, and you had a line in here saying, rebuilding our manufacturing capacity requires the demolition of the idea that the United States can thrive on its service sector alone. And it's really an appeal and a demand that we get back into the game of making things. And so I want to tease you out a little bit more. What are your what we would call at the Atlantic, our owner David Bradley would ask, what are your up-at-night issues? And as you think about this arena of, this is not a new problem. The investment in basic R&D has been declining. The partnerships that we've seen traditionally that were so much a part of America's innovation juggernaut seem to be frayed. So what are your up-at-night issues when you really look at the equation of innovation in America?
Yeah, there are a number, and so I won't give you my whole laundry list. I've got a long keep-me-up-at-night list or wake-me-up-at-night list, particularly for the nation. Ursula talked about the importance of impatience, and I often talk about our ambition deficit, and I think we're talking about the same thing. It's this kind of leaning forward, go after it now, we can solve it, and we're going to lead. And so I worry about it from many different perspectives. I was pretty light in my formal comments on funding, and I just want to call out, aside to funding that most people don't get, federal funding for the starter stuff, for the research, for making sure that companies thrive, making sure we have federal policies that work to get manufacturing accelerated toward 21st century needs and not thinking back about 20th century needs. And often they say, well, we just look like we're just begging for money. There's a real problem for youth of America. And what I often say is that we can push and push and push and push, but there's only so far that you can push kids. What works much better is pulling them. And we see, at MIT, young people who come to this campus because, man, they want to be astronauts. They want to be energy pioneers. They've got these hopes and dreams of how they're going to change the future for all of us. And if, when they come to campus, we're in a trough of federal funding for research, because that's what they see through our faculty, if we're in a trough of jobs possibilities out the other end, they're smart. They'll go where there's opportunity. And so if we have a hiatus in funding the energy future, if we have a hiatus in imagining a manufacturing future that's different from the past or the present, why would they go there? They'll go someplace where they can see opportunity, where they can see things that they can do. And so this is another side of funding that most people don't see. And, the funding can come back, so you missed 3 or 4 years, big deal. You missed 3 or 4 years. You've missed 3 or 4 years of kids who could go out and become part of the solution. So I'm very concerned about these kind of, cycles in funding, cycles in enthusiasm, and cycles of opportunity, because they have devastating effects on who joins the force to make the changes that we need.
But you help run a complex system. You understand budgets, and if you were President of the United States and putting a budget forward in the economy, I imagine that I think while many here, including myself, are completely supportive of the general objectives implied in this conference, you can imagine lots of other stakeholders in the kind of U.S. System making the same claims for what they need. So when you begin looking as a realist, as someone who understands complex systems, about lean times ahead and the funding realities, it's one thing to talk about what needs to be done. It's another thing to deal with the question of trade-offs and whatnot. So let me just put it to you. You have such concentrations of excellence at MIT. You have them at Xerox. You have them within the private sector. What basically has to change to get the system back, to make sure that those excellent minds that you're training do have it in a time that's leaner financially? Or is that just not possible? Are we just looking at a bleak future?
You know, look, if we look at the amount of dollars we put into the R&D base federally, it's not a lot of money. And yet, that's the easiest thing to cut. So you talk about the discretionary budget, or, the pieces of the budget where you can axe. Well, you can axe them, but it's not going to solve the budget problem. And so I think we're looking at a lot of short-term solutions, and I would just like to see a lot of more long-term perspectives. The fact is, if you look at the ROI of our research investments since World War II, they have returned anyone would invest in that domain because they've returned many times over. We talk about $1 billion for ARPA-E. I think that's just terrific. But you know what? You want to talk about game changers? Look at what the NIH has done. The NIH budget right now is, in the neighborhood of $30 billion. It's a lot of money, sure, but hey, for something on the order of $4 per American per year for like 30 years, we've reduced death from heart attacks and stroke by 63%. Wow, that's pretty good. Those people are still contributing to the economy, those that didn't die.
Right.
The other just astonishing example, we think that, energy storage, a really hard problem. It is a hard problem. But a new disease that no one's ever heard of before, that is projected to put an AIDS patient in every hospital bed in America, now that's a really hard problem, and we got our hands around that in a decade.
Right.
A decade. We haven't solved it entirely, but we have treatments that we've turned a death sentence to a chronic disease. So we know as a nation we can do it, and we have an enormously powerful history of making investments that are large, but not outrageous. We're not talking about the costs of our healthcare system. We're not talking about the costs of our defense budget. And believe me, I'm a big believer in the importance of our defense operations. The Department of Defense has funded a huge fraction of the breakthrough technologies that we don't think about as defense investments, like our fabulous computers, PDAs, that GPS that prevents us from getting lost. A lot of things the Defense Department has given to us through their investments in research. But I just think as a nation we've got to think about what kinds of investments we make so that we're strong, not tomorrow, that we don't balance the budget tomorrow, but that we're strong in 10 years, 25 years, that we've got a growing economy, that we're taking the power of the young people around the nation and turning them to invent a future that, frankly, outpaces the rest of the world.
Thank you. Ursula, you get to spend more quality time with President Obama than most of us. You're on his economic advisory board. You go in, and we don't know what goes on in those meetings, but I'd love to know, are you nice and polite at those meetings, or do you pound the table and tell him you've got to fix this, Mr. President? And if you're doing that, what is on your list of what you're telling the President of the United States is broken and needs to be fixed?
So since most of these meetings are not public, I'll keep them.
It's my job.
Keep them not public. Keep them private. I found that I get myself in trouble if I speak out of tune. But I will say that I don't think that there's any confusion about how passionate and how important this topic is, not only from me as a business leader, but from the business leaders in this meeting, in these meetings, on how important it is that we actually take a long view on the problems that we have and not kind of get ourselves wrapped around a pole in political speak and short-termism. So we do pound the table pretty rigorously and pretty loudly to make sure that we actually get the point across. One of the things that Susan was saying that aligns to this point, but so how do we make a decision? This is like a big problem. You have a lot of funding, you have a lot of choices. when I stepped back and tried to figure out where I was going to focus some of my energies, a lot of questions, and so Ursula, can you do this? Can you do this? Two areas that I decided to get involved in. One was education, primarily because without it, we're just dead. I mean, there's no way that we can solve the problems. There's no way that we can actually sustain a great nation. There's no way that we can have a great world if we don't have educated individuals. So that's one. The second one was energy. I have no reason to be engaged in energy except for without it, we are dead. Without a solution to this problem, we're dead. So if I were the president, I'm not, how would I make a choice? I'd say it's the most obvious problem that we have. Either we're going to continue to drill these big holes in the ground and try to, it's the most amazing thing, try to find this kind of black slurry stuff around and kind of get it out. And we know all the holes are going to be somewhere else. Either we're going to continue to do that or we're going to open up options for ourselves and do research, have trained people who can do research to give us optionality so that we can have a sustainable future for not only ourselves, but for our kids and for their kids. If we don't solve the problem, I just don't know what options you have as a nation.
Well, let me press you on this a little bit. As I drove in this morning, and most of you were inside already, but it kind of looked like a ghost town out here, and I've never been down to National Harbor, so this is a great first time, and walked in and said, wow, 3,000 people here. And I began asking myself the question, what if we weren't here? What if Washington was just not an issue? When I go to Xerox Park, I go to Palo Alto, I talk to West Coast innovators or Cambridge innovators, you get the sense that they feel like they are changing the world. They're changing. Steve Jobs changed the way we all work and think and interact and tweet, whatever. Just the platform is amazing. But there are many others that feel that they're changing the world. And they look at Washington as a place that generally gets in the way, is a lag factor, has no idea to the degree to which there are these pent-up opportunities in innovation. And so if we just all disappeared, would Xerox and the way you look at the technology picture change in any way? Would some of these targets that you're looking at in terms of talking about what needs to be done on energy, on education, be better if this town were a little bit less of a factor?
I don't think so. I actually think that we're underutilizing the power and the innovation capability, the funding capability, the corralling capability of this town. I don't think it's possible. Some problems are obviously possible to solve without Washington. I don't think energy is one of those. I mean, I think that the investments that you need structurally, the risks that you have to take, the size of the risk, the global nature of this problem requires an organizing funding force, and that is, for this nation, Washington, D.C. I think that we can do things by ourselves. MIT has great things that they can do. Xerox has things that they can do. But I don't think it's possible for us to solve the problem from a national perspective or to address the problem effectively from a national perspective without some articulate, long-term, clear message to the people and to the sources out here. I don't think it's possible. So I think it sounds like it's easy because this is a slow place. Washington is a slow place, and it's not necessarily a clear place. But that just means that we have to change it. We have to make it faster and make it clearer. It doesn't mean we have to dump the whole thing. And that's part of the work that I think we have to do.
Do you have the talent you need as a CEO of a major company? Do you have the kind of brains and talent? Is MIT feeding you enough of the folks that you need, or do you have deficits?
We do. We have deficits, but the deficits are not deficits, a global deficit, as much as it is a regional deficit. So our deficit is that our deficit is that we have to actually import talent to solve problems or export the problems to get them solved. And that's, by the way, their businesses are doing it.
And are you importing more talent or exporting more problems?
We're doing both. We're doing both. And it depends on the problem. It depends on the type of problem. We have, the complication that we have today is that we have an invested base. Right? I have a base of engineers and scientists who are very good at A. I need some of them to stay doing that, but I need other engineers and scientists who are good at B, whatever B happens to be. B today exists not only in the United States, but it exists in China, it exists in India, often trained in the United States, by the way, and then summarily sent home after they get their degrees. Right. So we follow them to where they are. We follow this work to where they are. And that's not necessarily the most efficient way to do it. but it is the way that it is done today. So we try to hire as much as we can in the U.S., but we also know that since we are a global company, we have to hire.
Susan, where does your best talent go? I know you come from the neuroscience field. As you look across the sciences, but particularly, I would say, let's look at the communications and IT and the engineering arena. Where is your best talent coming from, and where is it going?
So, our view of what the world presents and what the nation presents has changed. I would say 25 years ago, maybe it's only 20 years ago, there was no question that the United States was the place to be if you wanted to be where the action is. And we still see that, and particularly in our graduate programs, and it's true among graduate programs all over the United States. They are the most attractive post-baccalaureate programs anywhere in the world. This is the place where everyone in the world wants to be for graduate education. But the fact is they come from all over the world, and when they graduate from our great universities, 25 years ago, first choice was to stay in the United States by a long margin. And the immigration policies weren't particularly friendly, but people were willing to put up with the indignities of the U.S. immigration system because there really wasn't a good second choice, or not a great second choice. And now, boy, it has changed. Some of the great innovation centers are springing up in interesting places around the world. Some of the most interesting problems around energy, in particular, have been articulated according to local conditions in other places around the world. Obviously, there's talent everywhere in the world, and so second choice, or maybe it's not second choice, maybe it's equal to first choice. Now, there are a lot of places to go to be part of inventing the future, and guess what? Our immigration policies are the same. So it's less interesting, it's less possible for people to put up with the indignities of the U.S. immigration system when you can just pick up and go home or go to any number of other interesting places. So I think we've got to think differently about the international scene. We've got to think differently about competition. And I think we should be playing really competitive ball on keeping the very best minds and attracting the very best minds here in America because we need them to solve problems. Even with that, MIT is developing linkages with what we believe are going to be the innovation hubs of the future. Xerox is too. It's a global marketplace doesn't begin to capture the excitement of being part of a global innovation system, and that's just a fact. What concerns me is that the policies we have in the United States prohibit us from competing with the ferocity that I think we should to capture the great talent to work on things that benefit the United States.
Ferocity, the continuity, the focus. I agree with Susan totally.
If I go to India, if I go to Indonesia, Malaysia, which has even China, but a lot of the other places in the world that are sort of the rising powers that realize to go up the global power ladder, they've got to make things. Malaysia wants an auto industry. It makes no economic sense as you look as an economist, but you understand that they feel that they need these concentrations of highly sophisticated, highly trained and educated engineers and to make stuff. When you go and talk to the CEOs, and interesting, many of them are men and many innovators are women in this, they all have, in most of the cases I found, rather tough circumstances in which they grew up. I mean, their situations have changed so dramatically in a generation from moving from very constrained and often impoverished circumstances to really becoming the head of their innovation clusters. And I think, Ursula, I just want to get in the personal territory. You grew up in projects with mother was single mother. You didn't have the kind of cookie cutter life of the typical Harvard MBA grad CEO. And so I'm sort of interested in how you look at jobs and this innovation and technology and high-wage job creating question as a pathway for many people who just don't get, born with a silver spoon in their mouth.
First of all, I don't know if a lot of Harvard MBAs are CEOs. I think more engineers are CEOs, interestingly enough. I think if you did the comparison, you'll find that.
Okay, that's a good point. Touche.
We always
MIT.
we always kind of say Harvard MBA CEOs, but it's not really so. I think that for me, what I found was that when I was growing up, opportunity, the whole idea was that I had to take advantage of opportunities. First, I had to find them and take advantage of them. So while I grew up in an impoverished area, I didn't grow up with an impoverished mind, or
right.
my mother wasn't devoid of hope or aspirations for her children. And she pushed us really hard and expected very high things from us, expect us to accomplish and take advantage, to overtake advantage of the opportunities that we had, not just take advantage of the opportunities that we had. So I never really thought of myself as someone who started behind. I actually thought of myself as somebody who started where everybody else started.
Right.
I think this idea of impatience that we have today, and you call it the ambition deficit, Susan called it the ambition deficit, is my biggest worry. It's not the economic issue only. I think that the economic issue has now is now embodied in a hope issue as well. It's embodying a lack of hope issue as well. So what I work on a lot and what I push a lot is that the path to a better life is to have a better mind. That has been true from the beginning of time. You know, it's been true from the beginning, and it's not changed even today. You have to actually engage yourself into solving problems. We do have to have an economy that makes things. We do have to have an economy that employs intellect to solve complex problems. There is no way around it. So we have to take even the least wealthy person in this nation, and we have to give them a foundation so that they can participate at a higher level in the economy. And we're starting to lose sight of that, I think, particularly in this country. Pushing hard, pushing children hard, having high expectations, even if the parents are not around. So when I walked into a school building, there was not somebody who said, well, your mother's not paying attention, or my mother was, but my father's not paying attention, so we can give you a break here. It's not that at all. It's literally you have to participate. You have to have high expectations of the children. You have to expect and inspect for greatness. And I think that if we do that, we can actually get into a society that more people can participate. Next step, we have to make things. A world where we don't make anything. I keep trying to envision this. Okay, so here we are, a country. We don't make any cars. We don't have any power plants. We don't have any oil. We have no machines made here. We have nothing. So what do we do? What we do at the end of the day is, I guess,
raise this question where, Boeing has this Dreamliner, and they're going to do, some big events this year, bring the Dreamliner out to Washington. I hope I'm not divulging a secret, but there will be a Dreamliner here at some point. But it makes you think, in 10 years, will we still be making airplanes?
We can
if we make it a point to do that.
Yeah, and we have to, because this mythology that somehow you can invent it here and make it
somewhere else. Yeah.
That works for one cycle. But if you don't have the nearby
Susan, that was
feedback,
true in the 1990s. I want to press you because it's very interesting that the reason that I love this summit, the issues and ideas that are coming up, is that I do feel that there's finally a kind of punctuation point, a seriousness of approach, that this feels like a discontinuous moment in America's economic choices. You have a gentleman working for you here in D.C., Bill Bonvillian, and we used to work in the Senate. He worked for Joe Lieberman, and at the time, in the 1990s, we were looking at the declines in basic R&D. We were looking at the very beginning of the very serious offshoring of capacity. When 9/11 hit, I remember being at a dinner with John Marburger, then President Bush's national security advisor, who was talking about the talent problem and the crisis that was going to be built in American universities if we couldn't get the smart, great people from other countries into the system, that they were there. The next night at a fundraising dinner, I ran into Craig Barrett of Intel, and I told him what Marburger had said, and he said, it's already over. If you lose a 6 or 9 month cycle of moving talent, we will do what you do. We will export the problem, we'll export the R&D design lab, and sure enough, Intel then exported this very important R&D center to Shanghai. So So we're certainly replaying these issues, and I guess what I'm putting back is they're not new. Do you have confidence now, given both of your position, that this time around there is seriousness, real resolve, and a real capacity to change the equation, make the investments in the right place that we didn't make in the 1990s?
I'm not confident that we're ready to change the game. I mean, this room, all of us here, sure, we're ready to change the game. We've got all the tools we need to change the game, and the government needs to understand what the opportunities are. But, easy to talk about, oh, we invented here, we make it there, it's a service economy. But the fact is there are many factors in that equation. One of the factors that, frankly, is working to the benefit of driving manufacturing back in America is simply the cost of energy. Mm-hmm. You know, when you didn't have to calculate what it was going to cost to, you know, make your dishwasher in South Korea and bring it to the United States, yeah, that's an easy thing. You just make it there because you can transport for nothing.
Right.
You know what? That's not true anymore. And so the high cost of energy is working in the favor of more local resourcing and more local production. There are a lot of things that fit into it. You know, one of the things that I was just astonished when you think about manufacturing, we have a big manufacturing study going on at MIT, and I'm co-chairing with Andrew Liveris, the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership. I go around the nation talking to people about manufacturing. Half the people looks at me like, hello, where have you been? America doesn't do manufacturing anymore. And the other half kind of grab me by my shoulders and say, nothing's more important for the nation, do something. So there's this kind of bimodal sense of manufacturing. But if you look at the numbers, you know, manufacturing jobs in the United States have decreased. If you look at just manufacturing productivity dollars that we're producing in manufactured goods, the United States and China right now are pretty much neck and neck, depending on currency. One's a little higher, one's a little lower. But China's on a real acceleration. But if you look at the number of people employed in manufacturing for the same dollar output, the United States employs 10% of the workforce. We have an enormous productivity advantage. It's a scary thing when you think about what that means for jobs, but we have an enormous productivity advantage, and some companies are bringing manufacturing back to the United States so they can just make things faster with fewer people and more economically. So I think a lot of this stuff is fashion, and it comes and goes, but a lot of this stuff comes and goes because of real economic considerations. And I'm hoping, and I hear positive things from many of the business leaders of major companies, that it makes sense to manufacture some things in the United States. My real concern about this thing about separating R&D and manufacturing is that we lose the R&D. You need to have the feedback loop, and you can do it to some degree. But I visited the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company's factory in Taiwan last fall. And I said, well, you go through the factory and there are very few people because it's all automated, very exciting, you know, state-of-the-art plus manufacturing. He said, well, our engineers are here because when the factory's working, you don't have any people, and as soon as something goes wrong, they need to be able to actually engage with the robots, the machinery, the production capacity. And it was just one example of the necessity of being near in order to run the next cycle of the innovations that you need to advance manufacturing. And I want to just be very clear. I love it that there are R&D centers in Shanghai and Bangalore and Rio. I mean, this is just incredibly exciting to see the world kind of, you know, gearing up into this next phenomenal chapter of the economy where another many hundreds of millions of people will come out of poverty. I think that's great. The United States can't sit back and use a 1960s model. We have got to do what we've been doing, you know, through the second half of the 20th century. Invent the next model, rather than just saying, oh, we give up, let someone else do it. We're going to all go on vacation.
So you just made a very powerful statement. Ursula, what are the characteristics of the 1960s model that have to be, as Susan wrote in her New York Times piece, demolished?
So one of the things that has to be reinstated is a tighter collaboration between government and the private sector, a more symbiotic relationship, one that understands that many different policies, so education policy, tax policy, these policies actually drive business cycles. And if they cooperate, they drive business cycles in a positive way, and if they don't, businesses figure out a way, right? I actually really agree with, this is not an either-or. This is not, oh my goodness, you manufacture in Rio, and that's a bad thing. No, what we have to do is actually make it reasonable to make it here. There is no reason for it to not be made here except for that it's not tax efficient, not financially viable. We don't go because we like the people in Rio better. There's a financial set of cycles that actually drive away. So I think government has to work more tightly with the business to align policies that are long-term, that allow business to actually operate on a global scale.
Do you feel that track is improving?
I think it's...
don't take the ARPA... clearly the folks running ARPA-E get it, but what about beyond ARPA-E?
I think it's too slow. Mm-hmm. The cycles are so slow. By the time we get a problem solved, we're on to the next problem. I mean, So I think that right now government is moving... I think that we together are moving entirely too slowly. And we're on yesterday's problem, often. We're solving yesterday's problem. If you look at the landscape of the issues, the person before I came on was speaking about R&D tax credit, which I thought was really... The R&D, how long have we been talking about the R&D tax credit?
Yeah, I don't know. As long as I can...
Since I've moved to Washington,
right.
Which is a long time ago.
Is this a bad thing? The answer is it's not a bad thing. We know it's the right thing. We know it's the right thing. And we still can't, after 10 years, or I don't know how long it's been, figure out a way to just do the right thing here. And this is the problem.
I'm sorry, and do more of the right thing.
And do more of the right thing. So I think we get ourselves kind of wrapped up into a lot of things, 4-year cycles, a little bit of suspicion, business to government suspicion. I just think we have to focus on a couple of things. It sounds easier than it is, obviously. Right? People say this to me when I run the company. Ursula, all you got to do is do this. I said, well, if it was that easy, I would have done it. Right? Yeah. So I'm saying to the government, all you got to do is do this. I know it's not that easy, but we shouldn't settle down and say, well, it's just going to take a long time. We should keep pushing and keep narrowing our focus to the most important things. Having a system that drives creation and creativity in this country is a fundamental of our history and our future. So why don't we just have as many things as can fuel that as possible? And right now we're arguing about some of the simplest things.
Let me tell you a funny anecdote. I was off at a conference this last summer, and Dominic Barton, who's the managing CEO of McKinsey, gave a remarkable talk at this thing. He was very relaxing. He said, all of our major clients, our major multinational firms, are so frustrated dealing with the realities both with states and the federal government in the United States, and they look at this and they see the dysfunction, they see a lack of understanding about what needs to be invested in, and he said they're clamoring with us for industrial policy. They want America to get back to having a smart industrial policy. And he said, 4 or 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, this would be anathema. This would be nothing that any McKinsey client would have suggested. It was very funny that week as I was talking to someone who was involved with President Obama's, we'll call him his auto sector and other kind of manufacturing sector work. And he was soliciting, some ideas of things that a group we had in the Senate in the 1990s were doing and thinking about. And I said, well, we were really talking then about a smarter industrial policy. And he said, in the White House, we can't use those words. We have all sorts of politically correct, landmines that we have to work around. And so it was a remarkable thing to hear a McKinsey guy, sort of Mr. Neoliberal, free trade, frictionless world, get government out of the way, talking about the need for an industrial policy. And someone out of the Obama White House saying, we can't even say the words. Now, admittedly, this was last summer. Seems like they've made a couple of shifts. But how do you see this, Ursula? Do you think we need a smart industrial policy today that we don't have? And should the White House get over? Should they allow those words to be said inside?
I don't have a lot of opinion about the words. I don't care what they call it. But I do believe that we need if an industrial policy means a set of collaborations between the private sector and the public sector that actually drive sustained, not 4 years, not a year right before election time, sustained growth, then the answer is absolutely. We need that. That would reach way back. That reaches back to education. It reaches back to energy. It reaches back to infrastructure. The answer is, of course, without it, then you end up where we are, which is just a set of disjointed states, right? We want to push hard on something, we don't have the educated base.
Right.
We want to move things from one part of the nation to the other, we don't have the infrastructure to do it. So the answer is yes. Now, I know that those words may not sound right based on how government is structured, so I don't know what you call it. But whatever you call it, I think we should do it more actively.
We should have a contest for the new term.
And I'm with Ursula entirely. The nation, whether we called it an industrial policy or not, has had a set of policies that have fostered creativity, innovation, the development of incredibly successful companies out of, people's garages and laboratories. And they're just, kind of the basic blocking and tackling. It has to do with education. Mm-hmm. We were absolutely top of the world in high school completion rates and college graduation rates until quite recently. And now we've slipped to, depending on which you're looking at, we're 15th or 21st or 23rd. And, it's not that we're doing less than we were before. It's just that other nations look at the incredible power of the United States post-World War II and what we did in terms of growing our economy, and they say, wow, this is what it takes. We're going to do it too. And so they're educating a higher percentage of their young people than the United States is now. I mean, we were the first mover. How can we lose the first mover advantage in education? So that was a piece of it. Infrastructure. We made fantastic investments in infrastructure and then seem to have stopped. I mean, it's terrifying to go around the world. And of course, you go to newly developing nations like China, and they've got these amazing highways highways, trains and airports. But you go to parts of old Europe, you go to Switzerland, and I walk around and say, wow, how can this building be from the 14th century? It looks brand new. I say, oh, they've taken care of it. They've taken care of their roads. They don't just kind of build them once and then, then what? So the United States, have the first mover advantage in many of these things, but we've kind of forgotten that we've got to tune them up. We've got to take care of our assets. And, again, I don't care what you call it. We call it industrial policy. Just call it national policy. I think we're allowed to still talk about national policy.
National policy, that works.
I mean, but there are just things that we have shown lead to a successful society, not just a successful economy, where people feel that by working hard, they can, get something done for themselves, and as they get something done for themselves, they're getting something done for the nation and the world. So as Ursula says, it's not rocket science in understanding what the components are, but it is just darn hard when you come to Washington and try and get it done. And, Bill, who you mentioned, Bill Bonvillian, who is my advisor, mentor about all things Washington, says, it is a very different feeling in Washington, and you just wish, when you listen to some of the debates in Congress or in this campaign, whatever we want to call it, performance we're now watching, you think, who is actually articulating the big agenda for the country? Who is saying what is good for the nation, where it doesn't come down to squabbling between the House and the Senate, or squabbling between different, candidates? We don't seem to agree on the direction forward for the nation, and that is a really serious problem. And I'll add in a kind of a global politics thing that disappoints me. We won the Cold War. We won it in any number of ways. We won it when I go around the world because everyone is clamoring to build an MIT because they want to build their country like the United States, and so they need a higher education system like the United States because that's how you get ahead. And I think, wow, this is great. There are many countries around the world that are just now coming into a more mature form of government, and we should be the model. And boy, who would take this as a model? And frankly, business leaders from places around the world have said to me, boy,
it's just coming.
And the United States isn't a very good model, is it? Maybe we should be looking someplace else. And that just breaks my heart, because we have had a good model, and we've got to kind of get back to what has made our model strong and has produced such success for individuals and for the nation and the world.
As we close, we've only got about just 2 minutes left in this wonderful fireside chat. Our logs are running down here in the fireplace behind us. But Ursula, and you use what you can. I used to say, and I know it will offend someone in the audience inevitably because metaphors are always dangerous when you're talking about companies, but it's to convey a notion. When I would go talk about foreign policy or the problem America had in the eyes of the rest of the world is we didn't look like we could achieve the things we said we could do or we were going to do. So there was a gap, and that perception really translates into weakness. And I said one of the problems that America has, and this is before the auto bailouts and cleaning up the car companies, is that America looks like the GM of countries. It looks well-branded, sprawling, has lots of capacity around the world, but it just doesn't look like it can pull itself together. And China at the time, and this is of course another bad metaphor, looks to the rest of the world like an internet startup, like a young Google, that because power and opportunity and these impressions are a function of future expectations, as anybody in the stock market knows or any public company knows. So what would you say are the two most important and vital things to change the equation of future expectations for the United States? And we've got a minute, so 30 seconds each.
Education.
Education.
One. And with a focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. And
to do it seriously.
I mean, to do it seriously. I say we should actually this is a bad thing to say in this country.
Go ahead.
We should nationalize it, and we should set a set of standards, and we should march every kid through it, and we should have high expectations.
I can't wait to see the tweets on this in a second.
I mean, I know obviously that doesn't work. Susan.
Yeah. And we have been the leader. Let's get off that gig. Let's set some ambitions for the future. What do we want to be? Right. Where are we going? Where does the future look like as we see it? And let's inspire the kids. I mean, I'm with Ursula entirely on education, but what will inspire our people to work harder, run faster, imagine a brighter future? So we need national policy. Sure, we need national ambition. And direction. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the worst kind of conference in the world is one with thousands of people in the audience. Lots of important and powerful people come up to speak and say absolutely nothing. This is, I think we really got into real issues. We have two great leaders in the United States who got into the grit of it. Susan Hockfield, Ursula Burns, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.